What's up, guys? This is Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets. I'm going to talk about some key levels to watch for as time goes on, what's going on with the economic calendar. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link that's down below, or use my QR code right here to sign up. If you sign up from Moomoo, the link down below and deposit $100, you're going to get $20 for free Nvidia stock. If you deposit $2,000 or more, you're going to get $50 worth of Nvidia plus a $100 cash reward. Deposits $10,000 or more to get $300 worth of Nvidia plus $100, or deposits $50,000 or more to get $1,000 of free Nvidia stock plus $100. You're also going to qualify for an 8.1% APY non-invested cash, and the offer ends very soon. So please use my link down below to sign up. There's only about 5 days left for this offer. Anyways, let's talk about what's happening with the market. So the market's breaking all-time highs. We did talk about how technicals looked a bit more bullish, but it depended on CPI, whether we would get a break or a big rug pull, and instead we got a nice break so far. However, there is one thing that concerns me, at least for bulls, because don't forget SPY now has this big gap to fill below, and we're going to gap up when we open. Now, if SPY can try to get back above 678, I think we pump to 680 to go even higher. But if SPY does the opposite, if we kind of like open, we gap up, and we start to struggle at these new all-time highs, and if 675 fails us, I think we could be dipping to fill the gap to 672, and there could be a downside move instead. So that's why I recommend watching the levels. If 675 fails us, we could be looking for downside. But if we can, continue to push higher and break 678, we're going to easily break all-time highs. I think the levels will be very, very key, especially since we have that gap below. So what's going on? Let's talk about the levels just real quick. Basically, for today, we got CPI data. Core CPI month over month is at 0.2%. This was below expectations. Core CPI year over year is at 3%. That's aligned with expectations. CPI month over month for all items is at 0.3% below expectations. And then year over year, we're at 3% for all items CPI. That is technically aligned with expectations. And then for the first time, we're actually seeing core and all items CPI intersecting. They're the same. If the thing that's not so good is that all items CPI did still technically go up, but it's only by 0.1%, and this is what we were expecting. Whereas core basically came down a little bit, so that is a good piece of news, right? But overall, CPI is still elevated, but this is what we were expecting, and it's not way too bad. And we're hoping to see this basically turn very soon. But overall, not too bad. At least that's what the market was expecting, and now we're going to see if the market could sustain these high levels. But also know there's more data coming out. At 9:45 a.m., we have the S&P Global Manufacturing PMI, and at 10 a.m., we have the Michigan Consumer Sentiment data. So expect some volatility 15 and 30 minutes after the stock market opens as well. We'll see what that leads to. On top of this, there's been some tensions between the U.S. and Canada. President Trump said that he wants to end U.S. trade negotiations with Canada over an ad that came out. So that is, his opinion. I'm not going to go over every specific detail, but that's not the best of news. Besides that, I'm not seeing anything else too crazy going on. CPI was close to expectations. Target's going to be cutting about 1,800 corporate jobs, unfortunately, for its first major layoff in a decade. So once again, some news is like mixed, but overall CPI kind of like trumps everything. Besides that, there's more geopolitical news coming out. U.S. President Trump is going to be meeting up with President Xi Jinping of China next week as a part of his trip to Asia. And that's very important because they're working to de-escalate the tensions and put negotiations back on track. And the White House, once again, has said that they expect President Trump and Xi Jinping to meet on October 30th. The U.S., once again, has an interesting relationship with China, and China has said that they are opposing decoupling from the U.S. So that's a good piece of news because the Chinese Commerce Minister wants us to continue to trade together. So that is very important. Negotiations will be taking place. Finally, we have about a little bit under 300,000 of these calls expiring today, a little bit over 500,000 of these puts expiring for a 1.67 put to call option ratio. 668 is currently max pin. We're going to see if that's adjusted as the day goes on. SPY is holding up decently so far. So here's what's going on. We're in a range right now. The range is going to be between 675 and 678. I recommend watching that range to see which way we end up going. And that's going to be very key for how we end up trading for today. So it's always important to be unbiased and to watch our levels, and then we'll see what happens from there on out. If SPY manages to rally, okay, if you want to see us pump really nicely, if you want to see us push, we're going to basically need to see SPY try to break past this resistance right here. If we could hold above 678, then once again, we're looking for 680 as our target. We're going to likely continue to pump if that's the case. But if we kind of like, pop it open, then we start to dip and we can't hold 675, then don't forget there's that gap below to fill, and we could be returning for that gap fill before we try to bounce again. So a move like that could be coming in case we do lose 675 on SPY. So watch your levels just to be safe. We're in new territory, and that's the tricky thing to predict. Sometimes when you're in new all-time highs, we're at new resistance, and we might not just continue to break out from here. I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of like pop, and then we're going to see if we end up losing 675. If we do, I wouldn't be surprised if we fill the gap first before we try to bounce again. So be very patient with the market, and let's see how well we hold up. I will change to being more bullish in case we do break this resistance. But as of right now, there is that risk of us coming back down to fill the gap. Now on the QQQ, we're holding up quite well so far. If we could hold above 617.5 or close to that, we could continue to rally for 618.5 or above. But if we do the opposite, if we end up losing 615, then we could be tipping back down towards the gap fill over here around 611 to 610, right? So there could be a dip to fill the gap below in case we get a rejection, we lose 615. So 615 to 617.5 is our range on the QQQ. Lose 615, look for a bigger move down, but break 617.5, and then we rally to new all-time highs. So we continue to be bullish. Watch this very closely. We will gap up, so be mindful. There's going to be a big gap when we open, and typically gaps do get filled. There's many examples of that. So for example, when you look at the QQQ on the daily time frame, when we gapped up just a couple of days ago, we had this gap over here from last Monday. What happened? We dumped back down to fill the gap before bouncing. Same thing with SPY. We gapped up right here. See how there is this gap on SPY? There's a gap right here. We pushed up, then we came back down to fill the gap before bouncing. So sometimes these gaps like to get filled, and we're going to gap up when we open. So we're going to see if the gap gets filled or not. So I just want to give you guys a heads up about that. For the Russell 2000, this is also holding up quite nicely. We're at 250. We're also going to gap up. If we continue to hold 250, we're looking for an attempt for 252. We have to break 252 to remain bullish. If we don't hold 250 though, we could be dipping back down to fill the gap to 246. So be very careful. On ES, we're also looking a little bit more bullish. I want to see if we could continue to hold above 6,800. As you can tell, we're invalidating the head and shoulders, and we're looking more bullish. If we turn and lose 6,800, though, we could be returning back down to 6,780 or below. So watch and see how it goes. On NQ, we are once again pushing nicely. We're going to see if we could hold above 25,400. If not, we could retest 25,300. So watch that very closely. On Bitcoin, we have a nice looking double bottom here. We're going to be favoring 113,000. If we could hold above 112,000. But if we reject here, we're looking for 110,000. It looks like it might dip a little bit, so be careful with Bitcoin. Tesla's not looking that great. We need to hold above 450 to be bullish. If we don't, there is a risk of us returning to 440. On Nvidia, we have a nice looking double bottom here. As long as we don't lose 182, we're going to be favoring 185. But if we lose 182, we turn back down. So overall, we're still stuck in the middle. So just keep that in mind. That's what we're seeing, at least thus far. For other tickers out there, we also happen to have Appl. Appl needs to hold above 260. As long as we're above 260, we're favoring 262.5 or above. But if we lose 260, then we're looking for 258.56. So watch and see if 260 holds, or else we dip back down to 258. For AMZ, we're looking more bullish. So long as we don't lose 240, I think we're favoring new highs, and this could be looking for 245 plus. Palantir is also looking quite decent. As long as we don't lose 179, we could be looking for 185 next. For Coinbase, like I said before, there's a gap to fill. We need to basically hold above 336 to be more bullish for 340. If we don't hold 331, though, there's a gap to fill back down to 324, so be careful in case it turns. Amazon's going to test 222. We need to break that to push more. If we don't, we're going to return to 219. We're still technically range bound on Amazon between 222 and 219, so we'll see which way we break. Meta needs to hold above 740. If not, we could be dipping back down to 733. Google has to hold above 258. If not, we could be retesting to 254. And then Microsoft's at resistance. We need to hold above 524. If not, we could be dipping to 520. Finally, when it comes to Oracle, we basically are looking more bullish, favoring 287. We'll see if we continue. And then the VIX, it got a rejection right here. We could continue to fall. There is, however, a bullish falling wedge right now. We're going to see if this develops or not. So watch the lows right here. We came down to fill this imbalance, but then we're going to see if the VIX bounces off this or not. So be very careful. Anyways, we're gapping up for SPY in the QQQ, but be careful as there's going to be a big gap that forms, right? We need to just continue to break the all-time highs to remain bullish. Then we're going to continue to run. But in case we turn, and if SPY loses 675 and the QQQ ends up losing 615, I could be looking for the gaps to get filled overnight. So please be very mindful of that. It's not like we had a bad reaction to CPI. This is just something that naturally happens. And we'll see what happens with these gaps. All right. So be patient, watch your levels, be unbiased, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you for listening, and peace out.